Pentecost is not a quiet holiday. It does not come gently. It roars in with the rushing of wind and tongues of flame. If you can imagine what it would have been like to be in that upper room when all of a sudden everyone could speak a different language they couldn't speak before, it would be an utter cacophony, a wild noise in that space. And what emerged from that upper room was not a perfectly organized religion. It was instead a spirit-filled community, brave enough to carry the Holy Spirit into the world. Pentecost is not a holiday that asks us to sit and remember what happened then. It is a day to remember that the Holy Spirit descends upon us every day today. It is a commissioning. It is a call to move forward where God is going in this world. It is a call to speak up. It is a call to rise up. It is a call to go. And sometimes the places that God has for us to go are surprising. The story of Pentecost begins with a small group of those faithful followers of Jesus. They were bewildered. They had gathered in one place, as we heard from the video in telling us the story of Acts 2. Maybe they had gathered to try to talk things over, to understand everything that they had just witnessed, the death of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, and then the ascension of Jesus when he went from this earth straight up into the clouds. What had they lived through these last few weeks? The words of Jesus were, "You will receive the Holy Spirit." But when and how? What else was going to happen that they didn't know to expect? And it was in that upper room when suddenly the Holy Spirit arrived. Not as a gentle whisper, but as a howling wind and tongues of flame. That room was too small to contain it all. There was no room left for any fear or doubt that the disciples may have come into that room with. Instead, what happened was that they were entirely filled with the Holy Spirit, and then they were sent out to be the church and share the good news. Now, I often imagine the people in the upper room as just those disciples that we could name, those folks that tend to be those 12 men. But we know there were women disciples among them, and we know among them was Jesus' own mother, Mary. She had been part of the discipling group, and she had been there at the cross, and she was there in the upper room. This was the one person who had already encountered the Holy Spirit before. You remember way back in the season of Advent when we hear that story of the angel Gabriel coming to Mary and asking if she will bear the divine into this world through her body. And she says, well, how is this going to happen? There is a promise that the Holy Spirit will come over you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Mary has encountered the Holy Spirit before. In that encounter, it was private and it was quiet. Her journey with the Spirit began in the quietness of her womb and in the hush of her heart. That first encounter resulted in a baby growing within her, which she then birthed into the world. And now she finds herself in the upper room where the Holy Spirit comes to this group of disciples, and she is at a birth again, this time the birth of the church. That same Holy Spirit that came to her quietly now comes with wind and fire. And he came not to just dwell within one person to bring the divine into the world through Mary, but the Holy Spirit comes to dwell in every body, every voice, every person. And in that way, the church was born. But then we fast forward from Acts 2 to Acts 10. The flames have cooled. The sound of the rushing wind has faded. and the journey the Spirit set in motion has only just begun. Now we are encountering Peter, no longer locked in that upper room with whatever fear or doubt he may have had that day, but he is now standing boldly in front of a Roman centurion named Cornelius. He has gone to talk to this person who was a Gentile, a member of the oppressive empire, a man who should have been on the other side of every political and religious boundary that separated Peter from him. But once again, the Spirit shows up and disrupts everything. Peter's words that Sharon just read for us a moment ago are breathtaking in their simplicity. Peter said, "I really am learning that God doesn't show partiality to one group of people over another. Rather, in every nation, whoever worships him and does what is right is acceptable to God. This is the message of peace he sent to the Israelites by proclaiming the good news through Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all." That last statement, that Christ is Lord of all, reshaped the church. Because up until that moment, the assumption was that God's Spirit had boundaries. God's love had clear borders, who was in and who was out. Who were the people that Jesus had come to teach and to save? They knew. But now Peter says, I really am learning. Even after journeying with Jesus for 3 years, even after having the Holy Spirit come upon him, it took time for him to learn that God does not show partiality to one group of people over another. To understand that salvation was not reserved for some specific small group of people. But Peter's journey took him to a place he could never have imagined. His encounter with Cornelius, that Gentile, that person who worked for the oppressors, that changed everything. This was not just a small theological adjustment in his thinking. It was a personal transformation on his part. It was a spiritual migration from a narrow understanding of God's love and salvation and grace to one that was big enough to embrace the entire world. This came because he was journeying with the Holy Spirit within him. This same Holy Spirit that had hovered over Mary, the same Holy Spirit that had danced as flames over the disciples, that gave them the ability to speak in other languages. This same Holy Spirit had not stopped working on that first day of Pentecost. This Holy Spirit was still at work. And on that day in Acts 10, the Holy Spirit was at work in Peter to break down barriers, to tell Peter that it was okay to cross that political and that theological line to go to the house of a Gentile named Cornelius, because as the Holy Spirit was working in him, he was doing something new. Throughout this Easter season, we have journeyed with butterflies from their beautiful beginning as a caterpillar, and then their time in the chrysalis until they emerge and let their wings dry, and then now that they are flying, where will they go? Like a monarch butterfly that has to travel thousands of miles to find warmth and food, the church is not meant to stay stationary. We are called by the Holy Spirit to be on the move. Sometimes it's that metaphorical move from comfort to courage, from safety to service. Or as I remember Amanda Basta saying here at Central, the journey we took was from serve us to service. Throughout history, the church has undergone metamorphosis time and time again. Sometimes we give it a formal name like the Reformation. Other times it is simply a spirit of renewal, like what happened when John and Charles Wesley both encountered the Holy Spirit and had their hearts warmed. John encountered the Holy Spirit at Aldersgate, and his brother Charles encountered the Holy Spirit just days before on his sickbed. Both of them were so filled with the Holy Spirit, it began a sense of renewal in the Anglican Church that then launched the Methodist movement that is now the church where we worship today. Every time God has said, I am doing a new thing, God also asks, can you not perceive it? There have been some who have been bold enough to say yes, and there are so many who don't have the courage to do that. We're living in one of those moments now. Over the last 5 years, our local church has undergone all sorts of transformation that we've talked about a lot. But the denomination as Methodist has, and the global church has. When the COVID-19 pandemic began in 2020, it forced all of us to consider what it means to worship when we can't physically gather together safely. What is it like to worship in a dispersed way? What is it like to care for people when it's not safe to go and be in their home with them? In so many ways, now that we are past all of that and we've integrated the reality of COVID into our life, we are only just beginning to learn the effects of the trauma of that time. The way that children who were going to school or children who were born during that time now are being affected. Just this week, I read an article about children in school who can't take regular music classes because it is too loud and overwhelming for them because they were so isolated as very young ones that the teachers are having to introduce music classes in a more gentle way than in generations past. The social fabric of what we knew frayed. And today, we can safely gather, whether we choose to mask or not, but we are seeing the social fabric of our lives fray in other ways. Injustice and inequity is present all around us. In the church itself, we have struggled with this for a long time, but in our world, we are still struggling with this. There have been voices who have cried out for justice, who have gone unheeded for so long. And so this Pentecost, the question on my mind is not whether the Spirit is still moving. It is. The question is whether we are listening and whether we will go to the places where the Holy Spirit wants to send us, whether we will be willing to be the church that crosses those lines that we think may be set, whether they're theological or political, but the places where the Spirit is sending us to carry that holy fire of God in us into a world that desperately needs the light of God. There is beauty when we go out into this world and take the Spirit with us. It will bring change, though. We know that when the church was born on Pentecost, it changed from those 12 disciples growing the church, going and planting churches, teaching others what it means to be the church. 2,000 years later, when we gather for worship, it looks very different than what those first disciples would have known. They wouldn't have gathered in a place like this. They would have gathered in a home. They would have shared a meal. They would have not recognized what we are doing necessarily as worship. But it's what we know today because this is how the Holy Spirit has formed and shaped us. But what do we need to do to continue to reach new generations, to share the gift of the divine presence of God in this world, to take the message of God, the healing hope of Jesus to those who are out in the world and don't think that there's a place for them in the church? There is always change coming when the Spirit is at work. Change is not easy. Change is hard. We know that at Central, in order to have this beautiful new building where we have a place to worship and we have a place to serve others and we have a place for people to live above us, we had to let go of a lot. In the same way, Mary had to let go of a lot to allow her son Jesus to change this world. And this time, when she was filled with the Holy Spirit on that day of Pentecost, she had to let go of her expectations too. This time, it was not giving birth to her son, but being part of the birth of the church. Mary knew heartbreak on that journey. And it's possible that as we continue to journey together as a church into the unknown, we may encounter heartbreak. But when the Spirit is birthing something new, God is bringing something into this world, it is an incredible gift and honor to be part of that. And so, church, we are emerging into this new time of being. Our wings are unfurling, the wind is rising. Where will we go next? What new places of grace and freedom is God calling us to? What boundaries will we need to cross in our lives and in our relationships in order to go where the Spirit is sending us? What voices do we need to listen to and to lift up and to amplify so that we can be part of what God is doing in this world? The story of the birth of the church at Pentecost was not the end of the story of God at work in the world. It was just the beginning. And so today the Spirit is calling us. So the question is, are we ready to go? I want to give you a few moments to sit and reflect on our text this morning. I have a few reflection questions that are printed in the bulletin if you like to journal and reflect by writing, or if you want to turn to a neighbor to discuss, there will be an opportunity for 5 minutes to turn to your neighbor to discuss the questions for today.